What is up, everybody? It is Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning The Dr. Vibe Show. As always, I like to say, you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. And here on a Monday afternoon with a new, well, he's a friend now. It's Dr. Stephen Lake. He's a friend now, Dr. Stephen Lake, and he is based out in British Columbia, and he's got a good life. You know, he skis, he does things, he goes on holidays, vacation. Let me get the joking aside. He's been studying human dynamics and relationships between the sexes for over 30 years, first as an actor and director for the stage, and then as a psychotherapist. He has a master's degree in counseling and a PhD in educational administration. He has worked for Corrections Canada in a maximum security prison hospital and currently teaches graduate courses in psychology at Adler University. Works for the BC Society for Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse and has a private practice. And I don't know how he stays still, really. Like, he's got so many things going on, but we're really happy to have him on the conversation again. He's going to be talking about a very non-controversial subject today called how to fight fairly, and that I'm gonna let Steven's gonna take this on because I'm just gonna listen and learn on this because he's the expert, and he also, importantly too, he's a contributor for the Good Men Project. He also is the man behind their, let me get it right here, marriage and commitment section. He is the editor. So welcome back, friend, Dr. Stephen Lake. How are you today?
I am well. Thank you, Dr. Vibe, for that great intro. Really appreciate it. And yeah, that could be a talk for another time, self-care, how to take care of ourselves. It's something that even though I do things, as you say, it's a constant battle in the busy world of today, how to take time for oneself.
Yeah, and actually, we were talking about it before we came online live, that just how can we manage all this stuff that we have going on, and it's an ongoing challenge. I won't say battle; it's an ongoing challenge.
It's a challenge. It's a good reframe.
Yes, it's a beautiful reframe. What have you been up to since the last time we've had you on the program?
Well, expanding my business, seeing clients. I do a lot of psychotherapy. I'm also involved in a new program. It's called the Family Forward program, and it's about court-mandated cases when there's been a divorce and the kids are with one parent and the kids have become alienated from the other parent, and the court has said the other parent has a right to be involved in those children's lives, and we are involved with trying to make that happen, and that can be quite challenging, as to use that word, when people are so acrimonious with each other and do not fight fairly. So one of the things that we actually have to teach them is how to be respectful, and despite their real strong feelings of anger, and I'd even go so far as hatred towards the ex-partner. So that's wow. New. That started in September, working on that program.
I'm gonna ask you a favor. Can you write that down we need to have a conversation on the show about that, because that's a whole issue in itself. And during my show's journey, or my conversational journey, one of the great topics that was addressed about, I had a man who was actually fighting for custody of his children.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've only had one conversation about it, but what you've just done, if down the road we can have a conversation, maybe part of that larger conversation, I think that's very important and a very interesting perspective that you could give us on that.
For sure. That whole idea of parental alienation.
Yes.
And it's very painful to see, and the kids are like ping pongs, and they get seriously hurt in that process.
Yeah, and I'm sure the parents do too, but sometimes the kids are left out of the whole situation, right?
Yeah.
Right,
because they need both parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. And more than ever.
Yes, absolutely.
Great stuff. Well, today Stephen is going to be a brave man. We're going to talk about fighting fairly, and it's based on an article he wrote for the Good Men Project called 10 Tips for Fighting Fairly. So before we start breaking down and going through each one of the tips, in your practice and in dealing with people over the years, what are some of the key have things changed in regards to fighting fairly? Has it gotten better, worse, or stayed the same, in your
I would say
opinion?
it stayed the same,
Okay.
unfortunately, because
Why?
we're not told or we're not taught how to fight fairly. Other than in very specific situations, like as a guy, when I mentioned the article, I was taught to fight fairly, but that meant physical fighting, right? And I did boxing and martial arts and things like that. So there was a whole thing of being respectful to your opponent and stuff like that. But as far as arguing or engaging with an intimate other and how to manage that, I just learned from my parents. Whatever I saw there, that was the norm. And in my example, my father, he just went quiet. He was a military sergeant. He just went silent and then walked away. So there was no resolution of conflict with when I was watching him with my mother. Right? And even with my brother and I, we would be battling with him, and we would get very little in return. So there was very little engagement.
If you can be transparent, when did you notice or see a turn that, you know what, the way I fight isn't right? Were there any situations or moments that sort of put a light bulb in your head saying, you know what, this isn't working, I've got to make a shift or a pivot?
Yeah, when I got an ulcer, when I was in a relationship that was quite abusive,
Oh my
and I ended up,
gosh.
because I couldn't communicate my needs, that all turned inward, my anger, my frustration, and I got an ulcer. And I remember the time when my buddy had flown in from Montreal, and he was looking at me in the bed because I was bedridden at that point, and he said, "You got to get out of this relationship." And I'm like, "Oh, I know, but I love her." It's like and the big problem was that I could not communicate. I mean, I just could not express myself in a way that was effective, that I was not able to, because when we express ourselves, we also can protect ourselves. We can set boundaries. We can say and state our needs, right? So that's all involved in communication and looking after ourselves.
Well, I'm not going to have you expose too much more of your personal life on this conversation. I don't want to drive anyone away so early on the conversation topic. So let's pivot to the actual article.
Okay.
So the first point you make in the article is being aware of what's happening. So could you expound on that point for us?
For sure. So we tend to act on automatic pilot. So we don't even know what drives us most of the time. We just react. Somebody says something and boom, we react. It's automatic. It happens very, very quickly. And I could see this when I used to work in prison. The guys would say, "Well, she made me angry, and so I did blah blah blah." And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like, what do you mean? You're not in control of your behavior? See, our emotions come up very fast. Those are instantaneous. I can't stop a feeling of hurt or anger or shame. That just happens instantaneous. What I do have control on, though, is my behavior. And what I typically do is I'll take a breath before I actually open my mouth. Take a big breath so that I can just sort of think for that quarter second, that half second before I say something or do something. I think that's critical. So often we're not even reacting about what the person has said or done. We're triggered. We've been triggered by something that's happened. Maybe something a previous girlfriend or boyfriend said, or something my mother said, from way back. It could be 10, 20, 30 years ago. It could be from a lot. But we don't know that. We just have this feeling. Maybe afterwards when we cool down and we're talking, we go, "Oh yeah, my mother used to say it just like that. She used to say, 'Stephen, you shouldn't blah, blah, blah.'" And it's like, oh, that's what. And so when you said that, that really triggered me. So becoming aware of that internal processing and our internal thinking, which is happening at lightning speed, that's the first challenge.
I don't know, this may come in later on, but I always when I see fighting and people
Mhm.
say things, and after the fact you say, well, I said that in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, I think that's an excuse.
Why do you
I think
feel it's an
it's
excuse?
totally an excuse because we're justifying our behavior, post hoc, and it's like, that's the kind of thing the guys in prison would say. Well, I stabbed him. He looked at me wrong. It's like, yeah. So we can use that as an excuse for any sort of behavior from behavior that we define as acceptable. In other words, we have to make a choice. For example, I have a personal internal rule that says I don't hit people, right? And I don't. It just doesn't happen, no matter how upset I get. But what about swearing? Well, maybe my rule, your rule is like, no, I can swear at someone. That's okay because I'm in the heat of the moment. I have a rule there where I try to not swear at someone. I try to be responsible for my anger. So I may swear, but I take responsibility. So I might say, oh, I'm freaking upset, as opposed to you so-and-so, you made me feel this way. There's a huge difference by being responsible for my anger and not blaming the other person. Because you can't take it back. A
Yeah,
person's really
exactly.
hurt. And
Exactly.
yeah, and when we're in that fighting state, we're being defensive, we're trying to protect ourselves, or we're trying to attack, right? The best defense is a good offense. So, and we feel hurt, so we feel justified in hurting the other person. So we can say really nasty things at times.
All right.
So I think we also have a brain, and we can, through practice, learn to modify our behaviors.
Okay. Excellent. Number 2, acknowledging what it is. And you start off saying this is a tricky process. Why is acknowledgement a tricky process, in your opinion?
Mainly because it's clouded by emotion. So when emotions are up, literally our brain has a harder time thinking. The blood is moving towards the amygdala, which is the emotion center of the brain, and away from the prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking area. So it is actually literally harder to think when we get highly emotional. And that's why the breathing comes in. You have to change your physiology so you can actually think better. So that's why it's tricky. Yeah.
Okay, well, so might as well look at it right now because I'm sure it would come up somewhere during our conversation. The whole area of the emotional emotional part of this, separating
Mhm.
your emotions and reason.
Mhm.
How can we get better when we are, in order to fight fairly? How can we make sure our emotions don't take over reason, in your opinion?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is state what your feeling is. So that requires looking in. So instead of just being explosive and angry or whatever it is you're going through, to actually share with a person, oh wow, I'm just so frustrated right now. It's just like I'm feeling less like throwing something against the wall. The person goes, wow, that's pretty intense. It sounds like you're really upset. Yeah, I'm just right, as opposed to just coming on the attack, right? So identifying the emotion, but then sharing it as well with the person. And again, I always go back to the prison because it's the most extreme example. So when I had prisoners who were in my face screaming at me, the first thing I would do is, I would never look away. You always got to keep your eyes on the guys. Eye contact is critical. And then they would be screaming. The first thing I'd say, and I would sort of say it I wouldn't emotionally, I would try to rise up to it. So be like, wow, you look really freaking upset. And they go, yeah, I am really. And I go, well, what are you upset about? Right? And well, I'm upset about this, and this. And I've immediately got them into their thinking part of their brain. Right? So I've acknowledged their feeling. They know I'm listening to them, so I'm not trying to ignore them. I'm not trying to walk away. And then I ask them, well, what are you angry about? And then they tell me. People aren't stupid. If they know you're listening, and they'll tell you what they're angry about, right? And then you can also tell, what you're angry about as well. It goes both ways, obviously. It's a dialogue, not a monologue.
So, just listening to what you're sharing with us, then it's important for us that in order to fight fairly, if a person's upset, a key question for them is what is upsetting you? Because if you ignore that, it can make the opportunity to fight fairly less possible.
Yes, absolutely. And first, I acknowledge the emotion, right? Because somebody could be very quiet and morose looking. Again, I can come up to them and say, "Wow, you're looking really down. What's happening, sweetheart?" Right? Or they could be very angry, and I can say, "Wow, you're obviously upset about something." And their anger may be expressed overtly, or it could be they're just sitting there quietly seething away. Right? And say, "Wow, you look like you're in a real intense emotion. What's happening?" Right? So I'm acknowledging their feeling first, and then I'm asking, what's going on.
And if that acknowledgement, so just in the situation you brought up there, if you're asking someone, you see that they're upset, but they're not willing to share,
Right?
do you just...
And yeah, that's it. That happens. That's happened lots of times in my own life too. So what I do is I ask. They say I'm not willing to share, and then I tell them, "Well, it looks like you're really upset. As soon as you're able to talk about it, let me know. I'm here to listen."
Excellent.
Right?
Good.
So I don't keep prodding and prodding and prodding to try to get that explosive reaction out of them. Now that's assuming, of course, that they will come back to you at some point and talk about it. Some people may not, and that's not good because then that just ends up building and building and building until somebody finally explodes. You don't want that buildup of resentment happening either. But assuming they just, because sometimes, I've had it with my wife. She knows something's up. She says, "What's happening?" It's like, I don't feel in control enough of myself to discuss it in the moment. Or even better, I actually like feeling angry sometimes. It's kind of like, I want to stay with my anger. This is important.
Right.
So I say, okay, I need some time. No, I'm not willing to talk about it right now. Ideally, I would say, but I'll come back in 10, 15, 20 minutes and I'll discuss it. Mm-hmm. Right? That's a real important aspect, actually, is making sure the other person knows you're going to come back and deal with it.
Okay, good.
So sometimes in the moment, that's rare, but it does happen where I just like, I'm not able to deal with this right now. Okay? That, I have to be careful that doesn't become an excuse for not engaging, because that's an easy out.
Understood. All right. Next point. We've never heard of this point before. Letting go.
Letting go. Okay.
Or subtitled, Easier Said Than Done.
Exactly.
We
usually get hooked. I think it's just our ego.
Okay.
We get hooked on things, and it's harder to let go if we feel that we haven't been heard, or we haven't had the opportunity to say our piece. And this is why it's important to know yourself. So in my case, when I was younger, I didn't say what was true for me. And then so I was stuck, literally, I was stuck in the inability to share my truth. And that was painful. That had a lot of negative consequences on me and on the relationship. So I had to let go of that way of behaving. Okay. And that took a lot. So I actually had to learn how to express myself, and that was a process. But what you're talking about is more the, I feel I've been hurt, or I'm feeling she hasn't heard me, or he hasn't heard me, and you're in an unresolved state. I would say then you need to talk more with your partner. And typically that would mean going inward. And it's like, well, why am I holding on to this? Well, I don't feel you've really heard my point. Oh, okay. Well, tell me more about it. And then I express my point more and more until I feel that I'm heard. Right? Letting go, it can happen in an instant, because the minute your partner gets you or you feel heard, it's like, oh, you understand. Oh, thank God. Give me a hug. That's all I wanted. We're like little kids that way, right? We just want to be heard. We want to be understood, and ultimately we want to be loved.
I always say, and I'm sure we always say that, what is the difference between listening and hearing?
Mm. What is the difference between listening? Oh, there goes my phone. Excuse me.
No
Just kidding.
problem. I-
Between listening and hearing,
Is there a
I
difference?
think,
Is there a
well,
difference between listening and hearing?
yeah. So listening means I'm hearing the words, but for me, hearing would be that I'm understanding the content behind them. So you're talking away, you're blabbing away, and then I go, wow. Instead of repeating or paraphrasing, which is a typical thing we teach people, say to almost like parrot back what they've heard, you go, it sounds to me that you really feel that you've been taken advantage of. And the person may never have actually said that directly. That's hearing. And you feel very hurt by that. And again, the person may not have said that. They may be like very angry. But if you can go underneath the words themselves to what's driving them, that for me would be what hearing is. I call that deep listening.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I love the paragraph you have here in your article under the letting go, saying letting go is easier if you tell yourself that changing your mind or taking a new position is not losing. You are not losing when you're growing or coming to a new understandings about yourself and your partner. I like that.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's so important. So when I'm engaging with my partner, at the back of my mind is the experience that every time we work through a conflict, we become closer. Our love becomes deeper every time. Every time. In the old days, I've been with my partner for 18 years. In the old days, it might take us 4 hours to resolve an issue. 4 hours of work.
Yep.
That's not fun. And now 20 minutes would be long. We can resolve an issue in 10 to 20 minutes, no problem. It doesn't mean it's easy because I'm conflict avoidant and I don't like conflict. And so each time I am engaged in a conflicting situation, I have to take a big breath and stay present and not walk, because I would just want to walk away, right? So my father used to just walk away. That's what I want to do. That's what my learned process. And I make myself because I know the benefit is worth it. There's a huge ROI on this one, So, and I just know that. So I stay there no matter, and I can feel my ego sometimes. It's like, oh, I just want to start swearing at her and telling her how awful she is
Yeah.
and how she's taking advantage of me and all this stuff. And I just shut my mouth, I take a breath, and then I try to express myself as the best way I can. And sometimes it's awkward, and because I want to strike out, right? I don't want to. It's not easy, at least for me. I have to take a big breath, but I notice is that we sort of, it's like a tractor being stuck in mud, just getting that initial grip and then keep going and going. Then all of a sudden we break free. And then we're moving easily, and then oh, wow. Is that what had happened? And often it's one thing to have your own reaction, but sometimes your partner reacts to you. Now you're both going at it.
Exactly.
Makes it twice as hard.
True. Your next point is keeping the goal in sight. What does that look like?
Well, that's kind of a nice segue from what we're doing right now, from letting go. It's like, what's the whole point of this? Is it just for me to be right? I have that old saying, you want to be right, be a lawyer. You want a good relationship.
Okay.
If you want a good relationship, you're going to have to learn not only to compromise, but to listen, like to hear, to share what's underneath that surface anger. In psychology, we say anger often is not the primary emotion. It's just covering something else, an emotion that's more vulnerable, sadness, hurt, depression, right? Anger is a lot easier for most guys to go to, right? Because it's less vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with
that. Yeah. So keeping the goal in sight is, what's the purpose of this conversation, which is to have a more, to be heard, to hear, to have a deeper relationship with my partner, so that we understand each other better.
Would it be a good thing then in the beginning of these type of discussions that at least one of the parties or both the parties set up what they want to achieve with the discussion instead of just going on, going on?
Well, you could. That's when maybe you have something you've been holding back, and you say, "Listen, I'd like to have a talk with you. There's some real important issues, so let's schedule something in at 7 o'clock tonight." And then that would be a great thing to do, and say, "Okay, listen, listen, sweetheart, I love you. My goal here is to have a more understanding and better relationship. And here's some areas that have come up for me that I've got some issues about and some feelings about. I'd like to share them with you." So yeah, stating your goals and your love first, and then going into it. That can prepare the person in a real positive way to the discussion. But typically, it doesn't happen that way.
Okay.
Our arguments, fighting can happen just in an instant, right? Someone says, "God, you left your socks on the floor again? Stop being my mother."
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. I like one of the lines you have in this section saying that, remember, the most important thing is an improved relationship, not winning the argument. Yes. And I think it links correctly with what you said at the beginning of this topic about ego.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to one of the first things that we were talking about, the first point of understanding yourself. And when we talk about ego here, we're talking about it in how it's known in general culture, not sort of the psychological definition. So it's like that thing that drives us, that wants to win at all costs, that is protecting ourselves, and that little guy or big guy can make choices that is not in our best long-term interests. So it's very much a short-term thing. The ego that way is like, am I getting what I want right now? And am I being hurt right now? And if I'm being hurt right now, what's the best way to protect myself? It doesn't go, wow, am I being hurt here? Or is this all imaginary? Is this all in my head? Or am I reacting to something from the past? It doesn't think like that. It just goes, don't tell me to pick up my socks. I don't even have the answer for that, why the person shouldn't tell you to pick up his socks. It's like, don't tell me. I'm an adult. That's what it is. I'm an adult. I can pick up my socks when it becomes a power play, right? I'll pick up my socks when I'm good and ready. And of course, our partner's looking at us like we're an idiot, It's like, because maybe they have picked up our socks, and so they're resentful and they're tired of being like a mother to us, and we're not being responsible and all this stuff. But this is a discussion. It's like, what an interesting discussion. Why is it that I don't like to pick up my socks? Could be something to be learned there. The ego doesn't want to go there, though.
No.
The ego just wants to put the shield up and have the spear ready. That's it. And those things, the shield up and the spear ready, one could even argue that, that's genetic in a sense. That's our evolutionary process. So in the old days, when somebody confronted us, we did need a shield and a spear, right? But in modern day relationships, it's important to be able to put the shield and spear down. And the only way we can do that is if there's trust and safety.
Nice. All right. Our next point is noticing the process. And I'll be honest, I thought that was interesting about noticing the process. And again, it sounds like when emotions come into it, noticing the process gets thrown out the window a lot of the time.
It does. And it's something, when you can remind yourself to notice the process, you can stop at any time. So you can go, whoa, this is getting out of hand, or I'm getting out of hand. I notice that I'm just not doing and behaving in the way that I would like to be with you. So I need to take a 5-minute break here. Let me take a time out. Right? So I've noticed the process that it's just not, and we all do that, but typically that happens at the end of an argument, or like when it's gotten so bad and someone just says, this is crazy, and they walk away. right? So you want to do that way before that, when you are able to still stay present. Ideally, you want to be able to stay present. So anywhere in that process when you're feeling you're getting off track, or if the other person's getting off track, to just go, wow, this is starting to get abusive. I'm not willing to stay here. If you're going to keep swearing at me and throwing things, I'm out of here.
Right.
Call me when you calm down, or I'll call you in 20 minutes, or I'll come back in 20 minutes. It's just like this is getting out of control, right? So being able to, at any time in the process, to be able to go, it's like, hey, time out. We're losing it here. And we do that with kids, right? It's like, okay, Johnny, you need to go to your room for a timeout for 10 minutes here. And Johnny goes up to his room, and it's a useful technique. So noticing the process.
Yeah, it's something I see that doesn't get picked up a lot. We're just so many times, many of us are just so rolled in the emotional process, the emotions that are going on.
Yes.
We don't even think about A, B, C. We're just 26 letters instead of A, B, C.
Yes. Yeah. So because all you can be in control of is you.
Yes.
So when you realize that something's going on, that, all the alphabet soup is all over the place, I always say, take a breath, take a deep breath. And then I would share, I'd take a deep breath and then I'd share with the partner, I'm feeling out of control here. And again, see, that's being vulnerable, right? So you've gone from maybe an attack position to say, this is feeling out of control, or this is not what I want. I don't want to be fighting with you. Or are we really getting to where we want to get with this conversation, the way we're doing it? Let's both of us take a breath here and reconsider what's happening. So that takes, again, that's that awareness. And as you say, when it's emotional, that is very difficult to do. But it can be done, and it's practice.
Excellent.
And so in my office, I'll have people argue out something, and they don't have far to look. They just go, oh, well, actually this morning, And so then we break it down, we deconstruct it. So I'm a third-party intervener, so they give me the power, the authority to actually go step by step, and then they can see where they got off track, where they said this when they could have said that. And they see, yeah, so that's where we lost it. And then once they understand that process, and having done it with a third party present, we can make agreements.
Nice.
I have them make a list called the rules of war. It's like how to fight fairly. All right. So no, and obviously the first one is, no hitting, and then there's no swearing at, right? So you're not attacking that way. And then we have every couple is different as to the rules that will work for them to help them get through their next conversation.
Okay, good.
And it's practice.
Absolutely. Another small point here, admitting what's happened.
Yeah. This is where, actually, I kind of like this, because this is where you can, in a sense, in the good sense of the term, man up. So for me, it was really hard sometimes when I was younger, to admit to my partner what my truth was. Like, I want to go out with the guys, or when they ask, so what happened? I noticed you're late. What happened? Oh, I got hung up at work, as opposed to, well, the guys asked to go out for a drink before I got home, right? In other words, I'm trying to avoid my partner being upset, but in truth, I'm lying to do it. Typically, it gets found out, and then things get worse. So here's where you get to be a man and really in your truth and honest, and say, this is what happened. This is what I did. And I'm willing to be responsible for that. And, whatever the consequences are for that as well. So that one, I think, is, I've seen it with a lot of men who do not tell the truth. And all you're doing ultimately is delaying the inevitable. Because if this goes on for a long time, you start not sharing the truth in one area, it slides to another area. I've had clients who were doing crazy stuff that was really hurting the relationship, whether it was drinking, drugs, or women, right? And all they're doing is they're just delaying the inevitable. And why wait till it gets that bad? So if I want to say, this would be kind of risky, obviously, but instead of having an affair, my partner and I have an agreement that if we want to have an affair, we talk to each other first. Right? So that's admitting the truth, as opposed to going out the back door, having an affair, trying to hide it, and then it breaks out, and then we get a divorce or whatever, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. In a situation where there's a lack of admittance of what happens, when you sit with a client, what do you see a lot of times as being the root cause of that?
Well, I think it's coming from two things. One is fear. There's fear of the loss of something that is really important to them. And the other one is it takes courage. So in other words, you have to have your own self-esteem built up to a certain level and that again comes right back to that first point of knowing yourself, knowing what your weaknesses are. And that, to be fair to the young guys out there, that can take time to develop your own personal strength. And that's where I think it's good to have mentors in your life, whether it's, a good, healthy, strong male figure. My father, this is one of his good attributes, is I don't think he ever lied that I know of in my life. I mean, he told the truth. Sometimes it was brutal, or at least it was the truth from his perspective, but he didn't shy away from that. And sometimes it's hard to admit the truth, especially the truth about ourselves. And that's a personal development process, I guess, unless you've been taught that very early.
Absolutely. I fully agree on that. Next conversation point, again, you're not dealing with the easy stuff here. Starting over and backtracking. My gosh, Dr. Lake, what are you asking guys here to do?
Well, this is a bit like that earlier point we were talking about, admitting what's happened or noticing the process, right? It's when you go, let's start this conversation. I started off on the wrong foot. We're going nowhere here. This is what I meant to say. That I feel really bad that I didn't phone you. And actually, I feel kind of guilty about it. As opposed to when we started the conversation, I was making you wrong for expecting me to call, that you were just trying to power trip me. Right? Because again, if I know myself, I notice, we're in a power struggle. Right? And then, what's the point of that? You know what I mean? We're just going to end up bruised, psychologically here if we keep playing out this game. And the research shows that a lot of people, they never get out of that stage, the power struggle stage. They're always, and you may know couples like that. I know I do. I go, my God, they've been together 30 years and it's this power struggle.
Yep.
Still.
Absolutely.
And that's ego. That's the ego that's keeping you there. And the thing is, it only takes one person to step out of that and go, hey, I had someone, a couple recently, and I talked to them one session. They came for the second session, and the wife came in, and she was positively beaming. And I'm like, wow, what happened to you? She said, well, we were in the car, and I wanted him, he was going a certain direction to this destination, and I wanted him to go this other way. And he did. And I looked at the guy, I said, what happened? He said, because normally he would have fought this. He would go, I'm going the way I'm going. This is, the way I like to drive and whatever. He said, I looked over and he said, this is not worth fighting about. I'm just going to do it the way she wants. And he did. And the result is huge.
Absolutely.
He said he said in the bigger scheme of things, it didn't make any difference. Maybe 30 seconds, and I'm going to be upset and angry and then get her upset because I want to do it my way. So that's a great example of, he backtracked in a habitual pattern that he's been doing. This is not a young guy either. This is an older gentleman. And if he can learn to do that in his 70s, I mean, I was impressed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's serious. That's a great success story.
Yeah. And his wife was like, I kid you not, she came in positively beaming from this one little example.
Nice. Yeah. Really nice. That's a great story. I experienced that the older I suppose we're speaking, I guess, about men. On the most part, the older men get, the more transparent they get.
Now, what I've heard, which may be similar, is that older men actually become more vulnerable. Are you referring to that?
Yeah, and I'm sort of saying that too, and I think one of the reasons that may play into that is, and I'll be blunt here, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, that we don't live as long as women do.
Well, yeah, 7 years on average less.
Yeah,
and we don't handle stress as well as women, and that's a whole nother topic. This idea, like in arguments when we're fighting, they've done some research, and men actually have their heart rates go up more, their blood pressure goes up more, and it takes them longer to decompress from a fight than the female gender does. That's fascinating. So it actually has longer lasting negative implications on our bodies when we're in conflictual situations.
And we'll don't worry, people who are watching this live on the replay, we're going to use that as a discussion, a conversation piece, how for men to handle stress, because I think that is a very important conversation piece there. So we'll get to that. We're not going to, that's a whole conversation itself today, folks. So we're not going to get at it today. So we'll certainly get to the next conversation piece. And I have a feeling that this will be a reoccurring theme through many of our conversations, dealing with vulnerability as a man.
Yeah. That's, for most men, not all men, but for most men, I think, the way we've been brought up, being vulnerable is not where it's at. I was I was taught to be strong. I can't remember, how old I was, somewhere between 3 and 4 when I heard that first phrase, "You're a big boy now, don't cry." If you showed your feelings, you could get picked on at school if you were really young. Being tough was the thing to be. All the cultural images, that macho, self-sufficient man, to be a man. So as a boy, you want to be a man, which is strong, and strong men, emotionally strong, and to be not like women, right? Women can show their emotions other than anger for guys. You show those weaker, quote unquote, weaker emotions, right? That was not being manlike. And that includes vulnerability. So we've been taught, or I've been taught that. I know it's changing to some degree, but when I talk to my students, my grad students who range in age from 25 to 35, and I have all female classes, by the way, or sometimes there's one guy or two guys, but all the women say when I ask them, what are the issues you deal with in relationships? Are they different from my era? And they look at me and they go, no, same thing. It's like the guys are not willing to communicate. They're not willing to be vulnerable.
So, Dr. Lake, why do you feel that situation hasn't changed over the years for men about vulnerability? Why? What is it? Is it going to take time for it to change because it's taken so long to get to this state?
Well, that's a big question. That's a good question. I think there's a number of factors. Our culture, and our culture's changing, I think. Look at how many female superheroes we see these days. That I find fascinating. Now, is that going to make women more like guys, at taking on our worst attributes, physical violence. I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see. But also, I think there are more images now where guys can be sensitive, but I think we're getting mixed messages now. We're getting both the positive and the negative around demonstrating the whole range of emotions. At one time, it was like men had these few here that were politically and culturally correct to show. Where does that stem from? I mean, it's almost the nurture-nature debate here too, because maybe a lot of that has been, biologically reinforced through time. The values of being able to control those vulnerable emotions when you're out hunting a lion. You can't go, oh, this is a lion, I can't, oh no. That's not going to help, kill the lion, Somehow you learn how to swallow it and, you get that spear going, right?
Right.
So there could be genetic things that are influencing us as well. And then the culture, because in some cultures, this is where it's not universal. In some cultures, the women are dominant and the men are quite like women are, traditionally here. Some cultures in Asia and Africa where the men look after the home, if you will. And the women are the business people and do all that, manage the money, and are much more masculine in our North American context. So it's not purely genetic, because if it was, we'd all act the same.
Right.
All across. So it shows how powerful culture can be.
Absolutely.
Even if that was true. I think we're now raising boys to be more able to express their emotions, and I think that's a good thing, and we'll need that. That's ongoing work. And with the Good Men Project, I mean, this is an ongoing discussion. How do we define masculinity? And I think that's a big part of it. We have to define that. What is a healthy male personality? And I think that's a person who's loving, caring, able to think, has an opinion, is willing to share it, is not afraid of their emotions. How's that?
True.
Maybe that would be a big one. Not afraid of your emotions.
And not afraid of being themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Next point, boundaries. Oh, boy.
Boundaries.
What can you share about boundaries and fighting fair in guys?
I think we need to look at it from two perspectives. One, of us not infringing on our partner's boundaries, and two, being able to set up our own boundaries when needed. Going back to that first story that I shared, I did not have boundaries with my partner at that time. I was not able to say, this is unacceptable. I was not able to say, I need to take care of myself and do A, B, and C. I could not do that. I could not set up my own self-protective boundary. And the other one of respecting my partner's boundaries. I had a client recently where he said he's got some anger issues. He throws things. He's never physically struck his partner, but he does throw things, smashes the wall. Of course, these are very intimidating tactics, whether he realizes it or not. But he is so angry, he doesn't know what to do with it. So he'd rather hit a wall than hit his partner. So that's good. But he doesn't continue that boundary to the place of not touch. So he doesn't hit her, but he'll restrain her. If she wants to leave an argument or fight, he will grab her and not let her go. Oh yeah. So he has no boundary there. He feels he has a right to restrain her.
Wow.
Okay. Of course, she goes ballistic when this happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? Yeah. But so he's infringing on her boundary. All right. So there's two boundaries. There's the boundary to protect myself and then not to infringe on someone else's boundary.
Let me ask you, what do you think is more challenging for a guy to achieve out of the two that you just mentioned?
I think it's different from guy to guy.
Okay.
So for me, it was protecting myself. That I was not able to do. I can do that now. I had one partner. I don't know if I should admit this or not.
It's up to
I,
you.
but she hit me in the shoulder, not particularly hard. This was very early in the relationship. I'm not into physical violence, so I just hit her right back in the shoulder.
Oh.
The same strength.
Yep.
And she looked at me and I said, "Don't ever hit me again." And she never did. By that point, I was able to set a boundary.
Okay. All right.
Right?
Thanks for
I was
being
like,
thanks
"Don't
for
hit
being
me."
transparent.
Yeah, I was totally transparent, and yeah, so boundaries.
Okay. And finally, asking and receiving help.
This is probably one of the most difficult. So often in my practice, people have had troubles for years and years and years, and the research shows that they will finally come to counseling 6 years after the problem started on average.
Can you say that again?
People will come to counseling 6 years after the problem was first identified
Wow.
on average. And I often get couples that come to me 20 years after the problem has been identified. And do you think it can be solved at that point? Not usually. It can be if both partners are motivated and still love and respect each other. But I tell you, that's work.
But okay, so here's a question I have in a situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
I first of all, I'm amazed they're still together.
People love suffering.
Well, there's that's a whole other conversation piece right there. But then what was the impetus for that couple to come to you after 20 years of putting up with it? And well, I congratulate them, they're still together, but what directed them to you?
Typically, the woman has been asking for counseling for years. The guy has said no. And she sometimes used the threat of leaving. And the guy has still said no because he didn't believe she would leave. And he was right. At some point, the 20-year mark or whenever it was, she said, "If we don't, I'm leaving." And he got it. This is the final attempt. And so he goes, "Okay, I'll come." And that's what often gets couples to me. The couples I love working with are the young couples that come to me after 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years. They go, "We're having a communication or a conflict management issue." I love those because it hasn't become embedded in this totally dysfunctional relationship over 20 years of habit, right? It's fairly new, and they're both motivated. They're still really in touch with how much they care for each other, and it doesn't take much. I often see in 3 or 4 sessions. That's it. And off they go.
So
a few little pointers.
So it's a 20-year example that gives you the gray hairs you got, right?
Absolutely.
All right. That's good stuff. Well, before we let Stephen go, he had mentioned a few key points here that I want to make sure that men and those who love them get an understanding or have a sort of a tick in their brain when it comes to fighting fairly. You use terms like understanding, fear,
yes,
courage, self-esteem. Can you just give us a little bit, either a recap or a little bit expounding on each one of those terms for especially for men, the importance of understanding in regards to fighting fairly?
Yeah. Well, first of all, understand yourself. Understand what's motivating you. Understand what's pushing you to become angry or hurt or upset. That's the first thing, is understanding yourself. The second thing would be to be willing to share your experience in the moment as it's happening with your partner. Now, maybe a conversation before when things are well, saying, the next time we have a fight, this is how I'd like to do it. I'd like to do it a little different. So you kind of prime your partner to be on your side and in agreement with you of how to maybe work this stuff. If you're not sure how to do it, you can always just get my book as well. Just on Amazon. You can get hardcover, softcover. You can go get it there. And I really go in depth of how to communicate. And that takes courage. So it takes some courage to try something new to be vulnerable, to go past your fear, because we all have fears in doing this. And it's just, I don't know. I think the fear is primal. It's that fear of losing something that is really important to you, somebody you love. And we always have the thing, well, God, is this the argument that's going to break us up? But if you have really healthy communication and the ability to work through arguments in a healthy fashion, to fight fairly, that's never a fear. I never have a fear my partner's going to leave me because of an argument, ever. And that's because we've built up a way of working with each other that supports us and keeps us in touch with what's important and our love for each other.
I know you didn't include this as one of your 10 points, but I just want to throw it out there and get your response on it. How important in fighting fairly is that you realize that both of you have a friendship?
Well, that goes back a little bit to a suggestion you had earlier of setting the argument up. And you can sometimes have that formal thing where you've got something that's sort of sitting on the back burner you want to talk about. So if I have a friendship with my partner, that's a lot easier. And if I have to remind myself, it's like, hopefully the person that you're living with, if you're living with each other, or that you want to live with, is someone that you respect and appreciate your friendship with them. And you may have to remind yourself of that. And that'll make it a bit easier to go, hold on, this is my friend. Sweetheart, I'd like to talk about something here. That's a lot easier if I see them as a friend, not as an adversary.
Good point. Well done. Well, we'll end this conversation on that. Stephen, thank you so much for taking time to share with us, as always. Can you give ways people can contact you if they need some further coaching, counseling?
Absolutely. They can contact me on my Twitter. My handle is @StephenLake. That's pretty simple. LinkedIn, Dr. Stephen Lake. Facebook. Go to How to Communicate with Women. I got a separate page for that. And Skype, dr.StephenLake.
Wonderful. And also, he, as we said, he's an editor at the Good Men Project. He writes articles periodically, so you can catch him there also. And we have more conversations coming when Stephen can fit us into his schedule and his skiing. He will be able to come back onto the conversation. We always like to thank Stephen for taking time out of his positive, productive schedule to share with us. I am Dr. Vibe. I'm host of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of epic conversations, the place for epic conversations. If you want to touch base with me, Twitter is @drvibeshow. Email address dr@thedrvibeshow.com. Also, you can go to the website, www.thedrvibeshow.com. You can catch many of my conversations on the Good Men Project, WJMS Radio, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Tuned In Radio, and other sources. If you go into your search engines and just put the Dr. Vibe Show, I'm Googleicious. So we'll leave it at that. So, as always, I'd like to say, Stephen will be back soon because we've got a number of conversation topics that we planned out earlier and even some more just from this conversation to chat about. So as always, you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles and you're a solution for someone's problem. And always remember, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. We will see you soon. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to share with us. Have a great day and we'll chat with you soon. Bye-bye.